Okay, tomorrow we will be continuing our unit on World War II. We will focus specifically on the U.S. government's attempt to inspire the public's support of U.S. involvement in the war. We've already talked about the global tensions that have been going on and the Axis versus the Allies. So we will be focusing tomorrow on the U.S. government's attempts to raise support for the U.S. to enter the war. What we will be using tomorrow are something called primary source documents. And what I want you to keep in mind is, as an historian that we are practicing in class, and even an historian in real life, we really should act more like detectives. We have to gather our own evidence, we have to analyze the evidence, and we have to come to some sort of conclusion, just like a detective would. So in order to form these conclusions, we have to find our evidence, and in this case would be our primary source documents. So just to clarify, in case you haven't used them before in a previous class, they're anything, could be a document, could be a photograph, could be a diary, anything that was created or written at the time an event that we are studying. So it can't be made after the event. It has to be produced or, again, written or created during the time under study. So that means that there has been no manipulation done to these documents. There has been no bias, no perspective, nothing added onto them. They're legitimate at the beginning of their source. So just to give you a few examples again, they exclude anything where any individual had some kind of manipulation over them or had access to them in order to change them. So these are really formal written records. So again, they could be photographs, they could be letters, they could be artifacts, so something that was made during the time and has survived until now in pretty good condition. You'll find these in museums, things like that. Could be a poem that someone wrote, journal that someone wrote. We learned about Anne Frank during the Holocaust. Could be music, songs, newspapers, charts, graphs, documentaries, anything that was made during the time of the event. So then in contrast, we have something called secondary sources, so primary versus secondary. And secondary is something that interprets or analyzes the primary sources. So it's not a primary source itself, it's something that reflects on the primary source. So again, these could be like textbooks, magazines, criticisms, encyclopedias, books that authors wrote. So something that has a bias or perspective attached to it. So in class tomorrow, we're not using secondary sources. We're not going to be using your history textbook. We're not going to be using any kind of criticism or encyclopedia, anything like that. We're going to be using primary sources. So once again, you might get a photograph, you might get a written document that someone wrote, you might get a poem that someone wrote, so anything that was created during the time of study when the U.S. was really trying to inspire support for the war. Most importantly, this would come in the form of something called propaganda, which we will learn more about tomorrow. So I really just want you to keep in mind what a primary source is and the role that they play when a historian is studying a certain time or a certain event. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I hope that this will help you tomorrow during our lesson on propaganda, which is a primary source, and the U.S.'s involvement in World War II.